There's just something so peaceful about filming at night. I think it's a fine balance between dark and vibrant colors that could potentially spark creativity. To me, the art of filming at night is something that makes you feel the environment around you. To look around and be present with all the sights and sounds of your surroundings. This is what inspires me to go out and see the world at night, because there are so many frames that you can play around with and just capture everything with your camera and lens. Everything you see in this video is filmed with Sony a6700 using the Sigma 16mm 1.4, and I want to show you how I get my low light footage and how I edit it. 大家好, kumusta? My name is Victor. In today's video, I want to showcase how I film in low light with the a6700, and this applies with the Sony FX30 as well because they have the same sensor. So just to start off, low light isn't necessarily no light situations. If you watch TV shows or movies and you see a night scene, they're actually brighter than what you see on TV, the final product, and they actually bring it down in post so that they have clean shadows and they have controlled lighting. But since sometimes we're just shooting run and gun or we didn't bring any extra lights, this video is going to be helpful for you so you can film in low light as best as you can. Let's go through the camera settings and why I set it this way. First, let's talk about the shutter. The shutter speed, if you want a natural motion blur, should be double your frame rate. This follows the 180-degree shutter angle rule, and if you're shooting 24 frames per second, you're supposed to shoot at 1/48 of a second of shutter. Now with the Sony a6700, we can turn on the variable shutter mode so that we can push the shutter speed to 1/48 of a second. And with 60 frames per second or a higher frame rate, maybe you're gonna need a 1.2 lens or just add extra lighting into your subject or whatever you're filming. Now let's move on to ISO, and we're going to keep the ISO to the base ISO of S-Log3, which is 800 or 2500 for these two cameras. The main reason why we're sticking with these two base ISOs is because of the dynamic range. This unlocks the full potential of S-Log3 and its full dynamic range within these two cameras. Now, if you do need to up that ISO level, you can do so up to 6400 with noise reduction. I've shown a high ISO test in my first impression video of the a6700. Turns out that we can even push it all the way to 10,000 or 12,800 ISO if we're really in a pinch. But if we want full details and it's not a soft image, the maximum for my testing is 6400 ISO. But again, keep it at base ISO of 800 or 2500. Next up is aperture, and we're gonna need a really fast lens for APS-C sensors. Now, I've been using the Sigma 16mm 1.4. So far, this is my favorite APS-C lens ever since the Sony a6300. I loved it so much that I bought it again for the a6700. Now, you also have some lenses that are 1.2. Those can help, and these are really good for run and gun shoots or travel content or stuff that you can't really control light. The only downside with using a really fast lens and you're opening it up to the max aperture at 1.2 or 1.4, what's going to happen is that you're going to have a shallow depth of field. But with run and gun shooting or travel content, this is completely fine. But if you are shooting professional work, I always suggest to stop down to f2.8 to f5.6 because it's really going to give you crisp focus on your subject. Next up is metering, and we're going to set this to highlights only so that the camera reads the highlights and we can meter that if it's getting overexposed or not, so that if, let's just say, this light is overexposed, the camera metering will tell me, and if some light post or a street sign is overexposed, I can slowly lower it down until it's not overexposed anymore. Now, this will be a guide. The more you do this, the more you test how to shoot low light footage, you're gonna rely on this less and you're gonna trust your judgment and your eye. And we're gonna talk about that later in the tips and tricks section of this video. Now for professional use, I always recommend using a monitor with false color so that you can expose the scene as best as you can so it's noise free and that it's utilizing the full dynamic range of the camera. Lighting is the most important aspect of filmmaking and for professional work. Now, if you're looking for a recommendation of what monitor to use, I always recommend the Atomos Ninja 5, or if you don't need a recorder, the Atomos Shinobi. Before we move on to my low light workflow and share some examples with you guys, I'd love to talk about today's sponsor, Storyblocks. I've actually been a Storyblocks subscriber even before starting this YouTube channel, and their subscription constantly helps me and my videos out so I could gain access to unlimited downloads of royalty-free professional content for one predictable subscription cost. It's finally time to say goodbye to expensive paperclip models. Their curated library contains over 1 million 4K or HD footage, including these professionally shot low light footage. On top of that, they also offer easy to use templates, sound effects, stock photos, and more. Everything in the library is completely royalty free, so you get no restrictions on where you can distribute your videos. To get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head over to storyblocks.com/Victor Laforteza or click the link in the description. So I want to show you guys my workflow in terms of low light filming, and that I'm going to show you kind of behind the scenes when I'm shooting, what I'm looking for, and that how to edit them as well. It's fairly easy. And again, the more you try this out, the more you test it out, the more you practice, the better you are in kind of like judging where the exposure needs to be. Let's look at the footage that we have and let's get started. Okay, so let's look at what's happening here. And we can see that the multimetering right here is at +1.7. That means that this area right here is not clipping. Is because if we go over the +2 on highlights only, that's going to be clipped. And when you push it back, when you pull down the exposure, what happens is that it just won't retain any memories. Like what we have on here with the final grade, you can still see everything. And if we want to push that down, you can still see that there's information in the highlights. So what you can see here in the log footage is that this area right here, I don't want this. This area right here is a little bit blown out. This is what I mean, that like the multimetering is not super accurate and that you always need to do false color because you're gonna see this as like a hotspot. But the rest are like, you can see the highlights on here. And when we slap on a LUT, we can still bring that down in post. You can still see the details of the highlights. Meanwhile, if we look at this guy right here, if we keep bringing it down, the insides, the lines are gone because the information isn't there anymore. This is clipped. Meanwhile, the other sides, we still get some information on there because again, we exposed it right before the clipping point. This is at 1/50th of a second. I forgot to change it to variable settings during that time, but that's completely fine. It does very little difference, but again, every little thing helps. And I was at shutter priority mode. So my aperture was automatic. The camera was deciding it for me dependent on the multimetering. So the metering I put at +1.7, so I can just do like run and gun. I don't need to keep dialing the aperture for that, but manual mode is completely fine as well so that you can really dial in your exposure. As you can see here, I'm rocking an f1.4 lens. It's the Sigma 60mm, but the camera only needed that f2.2 at 800 ISO. And that's pretty much it. For the white balance, I usually just keep it at 5600 and then deal everything in post. Now, this is again a run and gun type of settings. Make sure to dial in your white balance first, especially if you have a subject in front so that the skin tones are right. But overall, in terms of travel content, this is what I go through. Now to edit low light footage is actually very, very easy. We're just gonna come up with different nodes right here. We are gonna do this as CST and then our creative LUT. And what we're going to do is go to that Sony LUT, take that in, and I'm just going to do my film-based LUT on here. And I do want to double that up. Maybe Fuji green is better. Perfect, that's good. I like the Fuji green better. And what we're gonna do is just lift up the shadows a little bit so that we can bring that up. And then we're gonna bring down the highlights. That's perfect right there. We don't want it to pull it down too much, because what happens is that it gives the image a little bit of the HDR look, and we don't want that. And it just looks unnatural. So we're just gonna bring it up a little bit, since the signs are a little bit more bright and kind of that's how we see it naturally with our eyes. We're just gonna bring it up just a tiny bit. Now I'm really not satisfied a little bit with the shadow, so I'm just gonna crush it a little bit. And from here on, this is our exposure adjust. And we are just gonna play with the white balance. I wanna cool it down a little bit and make a little bit of that green shift right there. Perfect. Now to really up this quick color grade, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a power grade on there, and we are just going to kind of emulate this light right here. Since around this restaurant there's a lot of tungsten lights, street lights, which are super warm, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use what we have in the frame and just boost it up so we get that color contrast. We got a power window, we inverted it, and we're just gonna create a little bit of that vignette so it focuses more on the center frame. And we are just gonna keep it just a little bit warmer and maybe a little bit more magenta so we get that nuclear orange. Now I'm kind of not satisfied with the way the gradient works, so I'm just gonna give it a little bit more. That's perfect. Perfect. And then this is before and this is after. You can see kind of just like how it pops, especially you want to guide the viewers all the way right in the middle, right in the center. And it just gives it a little bit more depth, since this is kind of like a flat image and we can't really recover this. If we try to recover the background, all happens that you can kind of see the noise. And this is why exposure is really, really important, because if you don't expose for the shot, even if you're at the base ISO, you're still going to get noisy footage. So the trick is, if you have kind of like a super dark scene, just keep it like that. You don't need to recover it. But in terms of the important parts of the frame, try and feel free to recover that. And if you want a cleaner low light footage, like I'm already satisfied with this. I didn't push the grade too much, and that the noise values are acceptable. And even if we zoom in, the noise values are still acceptable. Like this isn't like too noisy. The noise values are still acceptable. Some people really like clean shadows and really clean footage. And let me show you guys how to do that. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna add a node before, and this is going to be our noise reduction. And here we're gonna go to this little icon here, motion effects. I usually do 4 and then better. Let's keep it a medium because there's not really like good movement here. And I'm just gonna put this to maybe like 20. Motion is there. And then spatial noise reduction, we're gonna go a little bit better. Radius is medium or small. And I'm just gonna do it like 12. So look how it kind of nicely cleaned up the footage. It made it a little bit softer. So I'm just gonna give this a little reduction. This is before. This is after. Now what we're gonna do here, since it got a little bit softer, is we're gonna add that sharpen, and we're just gonna give it just a tiny bit of a boost. 1.2 is usually fine. That's perfect. Okay. Now again, this is a quick editing session, but when I was editing this, this is my final grade. And if you do want to learn this, I have a full video on how I color grade. It's pretty much still the same, but with this grade, I really just wanted to spend more time on the colors and the exposure, and this is what I came up with. So let's look at another example right here. and that it's the exact same settings as I had on the first clip, but this one, the camera is reading f1.4 because it needs more light in. There's a little bit more of a low light situation. This footage looks a little bit overexposed on the highlights, but it actually isn't. This is kind of like the exposure of the iPhone. This is my final grade right here, and I was able to recover the highlights, and let's see if we can recover the vending machine kind of like right here. We definitely can as well. I actually like that a little bit better. It's moodier. Like if we push this a little bit darker, it's a little bit moodier, and that you have all the information from the shadows, from the highlights, and it's well balanced. All right, so let's try and quickly grade this. I'm just gonna copy the grade from here, and we're gonna start over. I don't think we need the noise reduction on this one. We have the LUT and CST here. I'm gonna reset this. Bring up the highlights, bring up the shadows, and then bring down the highlights right there. Perfect. So after you've done the exposure, I know some people are going to say like, oh, the shadow's a little bit noisy, but if you actually dial in your grade, okay. So that's the exposure. We're just going to bring back a little bit of that coolness. So it's a little bit more nighttime vibes, and we're going to add that power window as well. We're just going to adjust this a little bit more so it's a little bit more seamless, because before you can kind of see the cutoff here, and we're just going to feather it really well. So it kind of just blends in, kind of like a light, you know, that cool light spreading, and then you can see kind of the transition between cool to warm. And then from there on, you can just dial this in. This is my final grade, and as you can see, the noise is a little bit gone, and that I just fine-tuned everything. This is the noise reduction right here, and it's turned off. I don't have any other noise reduction nodes on here. What I do have is the enhancer. I did use a Kodak Vision 3 500T, which is for tungsten, and then I did a print film emulation. And then here is a glow. This is what it does, kind of just like lifts up that highlights, and a prism blur. And again, our noise reduction is off. We can turn it on so that you can see kind of like how it affects the image. But in this footage, you don't really need that noise reduction. It already looks good, and that for people who are nitpicky for noise, feel free to add that noise reduction. And that's it. That's how I film and edit my low light footage to be as good as it looks. I've been a fan of shooting at night ever since I got my first Sony, and that I'm really happy to share with you all these tips and tricks that I've accumulated throughout the years. And if you guys have any questions, just feel free to comment down below or message me on Instagram. And as usual, I'm giving away my Sunset Film Lot pack, and all you have to do to win is comment down below what are your thoughts on the low light performance of the Sony a6700 and the Sony FX30. Does it beat full frame? Let me know in the comments down below. If you want to check out how I get cinematic footage from the Sony a6700, click on this video right here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. No,